our 2023 Civil Rights Conference. And it's just a joy to see so many people out tonight to share in this moment with us. But before I get started, or before we have our guest speaker to come and grace us with her presence and her story and her experiences, I would like to just give you an overview of our remaining events for this week and next week. Tomorrow night, we will have social activist Tamika Mallory. She will talk with us about the intersection of trauma, mental health, and addiction in the Black community. So please come out if you can tomorrow. And then on Friday, we will host a student health fair. So students, please stop by on the second floor lobby of this building for more information and screenings. And be sure to share with your peers. And on next Monday, which will be the culmination of the conference, we will have Ms. Joyce Washington, and she will join us in a discussion about democracy and race. So tonight, we welcome award-winning sports journalist Jemele Hill. She'll share her experiences regarding sports, journalism, politics, and pain. This will be a casual conversation moderated by Henry Giles and Dr. Danny Pirtle. There will be a Q&A session afterwards. Jemele will also be signing copies of her new book, Uphill, after her presentation. Now I will ask Wyatt Gilbert to come to introduce our speaker for tonight. Thank you.
Emmy award-winning journalist Jemele Hill is a force within the world of sports and journalism and has made her way across several media platforms. She's a co-founder of Lodge Freeway Media and a contributing writer for The Atlantic. In 2019, Hill debuted her podcast aptly titled Jemele Hill is Unbothered on Spotify. The two-time Webby award-winning podcast features in-depth conversations with some of the biggest newsmakers in entertainment, culture, music, and politics. Some of her guests include Vice President Kamala Harris, Ava DuVernay, Common, Ice Cube, Spike Lee, Gabrielle Union, Chelsea Clinton, Stephen Colbert, Issa Rae, Taraji P. Henson, and many others. Hill went on to launch another podcast with Van Lathan called The Wire, Way Down in the Hole, a nod to the classic HBO series. In 2020, Hill and her longtime friend, former ESPN anchor Carrie Champion, launched a weekly late-night show on a Vice network called Carrie and Jemele Won't Stick to Sports. They covered politics, news, sports, current events, and pop culture. Jemele Hill is also stretching her muscle behind the camera. She is set to produce the ESPN documentary on former NFL quarterback and civil rights activist Colin Kaepernick. She is also developing a comedy series for Showtime with actress Gabrielle Union. Hill's 20-plus-year journalism career has included stops at the biggest sports media network and several reputable newspapers. She joined ESPN in 2006 as a national columnist for ESPN.com, but then started making appearances on television, including SportsCenter, First Take, and several other programs. She also spent a season as a sideline reporter for ESPN college football games. In 2013, she and longtime friend Michael Smith began co-hosting the daily sports show His and Hers, which was also a podcast. Later, Hill and Smith co-anchored the 6 p.m. edition of SportsCenter. After that, she became a senior columnist for The Undefeated, ESPN's sub-site that focuses on the intersection of sports, race, culture, and politics. Hill left ESPN in 2018 and started writing at The Atlantic, covering similar topics for the highly acclaimed magazine. Before joining ESPN, Hill was a sports columnist for the Orlando Sentinel, becoming the only African-American female sports columnist in North America. She was a sports writer for the Detroit Free Press and covered sports for her alma mater, Michigan State University. She was a sports writer for the Raleigh News and Observer. The Detroit native has walked through many closed doors and taken an exclusive seat in the sports arena. We are delighted she has come to be with us here this evening at our Civil Rights Conference. UT Martin, please welcome Jemele Hill.
Oh, okay, there we go. Aha.
So we want to again thank you all for joining us today. Think of this as a very informal conversation, sort of at the cookout type deal for those of you who are familiar. But again, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out and supporting us. The Civil Rights Conference, as I said before, we've worked very hard in bringing individuals who are having an impact across our country in many different ways, and we couldn't be more fortunate to have someone of Ms. Hill's stature with us. So I will turn it over to my colleague and give her the opportunity to ask perhaps the first question. So I'll turn it over to Professor Giles.
I'm so glad that all of you are here. We definitely are fortunate to have someone like Jemele Hill with us. And so I'll just start off just maybe letting you give some opening thoughts, just maybe giving us an idea of what you are doing now, maybe some projects you are working on, maybe some things or issues that concern you.
Well, thank you all for having me. This is such a gracious invitation to be here, and particularly this month as we focus on Black History Month. You know, all year round we should be talking about these issues, but obviously this month is especially meaningful. And you know, though this is the first cookout I've been to with no spades and no liquor, but that's okay. We do it differently around here. UT Martin, obviously. Well, in the gracious introduction, that listed a lot of the things that I'm doing, you know, now. And, you know, at the forefront of that is something that was mentioned is executive producing Colin Kaepernick's 30 for 30 for ESPN, which is being directed by Spike Lee. Very excited about that. I think it's going to be sensational. I'm biased, but having sat through so many of these interviews with Colin, some of the things that he's expressed and just being led into his world, because many of us have not heard from him in quite some time. So I'm really proud of the work that we're doing with that. And also, this is his opportunity to finally tell his story his way and tell it correctly, because there's been a lot of really bad narratives about the reason he protested, the reaction to the protest. And so this will be a comprehensive look and with everything he's experienced in the last 6 years, and even some of the things he experienced before then. So I think that's something you all should definitely look forward to. What I would say overall about this season of my life is that, you know, for a long period of time, I was in corporate media. I still am working with a lot of corporate media partners for sure, but I was very knee deep in that. And as a journalist, you sort of see yourself as an individual singular unit. Where, okay, I go to this newspaper, I write about these athletes, these stories, I cover this, I cover that. And now I'm in a totally different, unexpected season of my career, which is the season of ownership. And I never anticipated I would be in this season. And it feels great to be involved in so many different types of projects, from producing executive producing a documentary to a television series, as was mentioned, that the comedy series that we're developing with Gabrielle Union, and some other things that are more behind the camera than front facing. This was not a pivot I expected, but I think the part I love the most about this part of my career is that every job that I have right now is a job I want and not a job I need. And what you work so hard for in your career, especially as many of you are starting out, or you're still in school, or you're at the cusp of leaving school, that's the point you're trying to get to. And understand that it took me 20 plus years to get here. So this was not overnight. And I know sometimes you see these faces that you may like on television, and especially in sports. Stephen A. Smith was not born at ESPN. You know, I met Stephen A. when he was covering the NBA for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And so the people that watch him now don't even know that Stephen A. But the reason he got to ESPN because he was one of the best NBA writers in the country, and he was covering Allen Iverson, and he was breaking news. And even before he did that, I believe he covered Temple University when John Chaney was the coach. So he has come a long way to get to be the face of a major network. So for the young people in the room, I encourage you to look at your career, whatever it is you want to do, both in college and once you leave here, is that it's a brick by brick process. You have to be methodical about it, intentional about it, and the overnight success, there's really, to some degree, no such thing. I mean, you can point to some outliers, but there are most of us who got to any point in my career where we have gotten to the position to have jobs that you want, not jobs that you need, is because you had to go through a brick by brick process. So as you're building and putting together your life's work, understand what that process looks like. It's not instant, and you'll have setbacks and challenges, but I promise you that those are things that are intentionally setting you up for the success that you will later see. So just keep that in mind as you go forward.
Over your career, you have seen a lot of different changes in the industry. And just with all of the things that you are doing now, can you talk a little bit about the different media platforms and how you have been able to seamlessly make your way into each of them, from print to television, podcasts?
So when I first got in the business, my first professional year in the business was 1997. And so yes, I'm 1,000 years old. But I've been very lucky because I've been a paid journalist since I was about 16, right? Because when I was in high school, I was the weird person who, once I figured out I wanted to be a sports writer in particular, which was about the 10th or 11th grade in high school, it's all I ever wanted to do. And it's all I ever attempted to do. A lot of times it's very normal that you change professions or ideas of what you want to do multiple times. A lot of people switch majors, a lot of people switch career choices. That is the typical path. I was very lucky. I identified it early, and once I identified it, I did everything possible to go get it. And so I worked for my professional newspaper. I'm from Detroit. I worked at the professional newspaper, the Detroit Free Press, answering phones in the sports department. I also served as an apprentice there for a high school journalism program that they had. So when I left high school, I actually had professional newspaper clips. And I knew I wanted to be, again, a sports writer in particular. So writing was my first love. I didn't want anything to do with television. And back then, the path was more distinct. It was broadcasters over here, print folks over there. It was like Bloods and Crips a lot of times, like couldn't stand each other. Like, you know, it was sort of playful competition. But as print journalists, we looked down on TV people. We just thought they were just so fake and like, we're the real journalists. Like that was sort of the attitude then. Like nobody in print wanted to be on TV. And so you didn't have to have that many other skills then in the, you know, mid to late 90s. You just had to know how to write. And you had to find somebody who was crazy enough to let you write. And you start covering stuff and learning how to develop sources and interview people and talk to folks. And, you know, your feet got thrown in the fire. Because journalism is a profession of repetition. You know, one of my good friends, Wesley Lowery, who reports about police brutality and the impact of police violence on people of color. He was one of the reporters who got arrested in Ferguson. And he said this, we were on a panel together, and he said, journalism is actually not, it's probably not the best place to say that, but I'm gonna say this anyway. It's not actually an academic pursuit. It is a trade, if you think about it, because you only learn by doing it. Like, you don't know, you know, even with TV, it's like the more times you do it, the better you get, but you gotta do it. It's not something you can watch from afar and just become a journalist by osmosis. You have to get in it. So at that stage, newspapers were very robust. They were sending, you know, reporters to cover national and international stories. They had money. They had big profit margins. So I was in maybe not the golden age of journalism or newspapering, but one of the golden ages when I first got into business. And then those profit margins started to shrink. And you saw all kind of cuts and stuff across the business. Media was starting to shrink. And I made some choices in my print career to better my pathway to success. One of them was becoming a sports columnist, which was something I never intended to do. My dream was never to be at ESPN. I wasn't even thinking about ESPN. My dream was to write for Sports Illustrated, because that's what sports writers did. And, you know, it was considered to be the premier sports magazine in the country with all the covers. You know, I had the subscription as a teenager and as when I was in college. I couldn't even tell you how I afforded that. I have no idea. I was like, did I steal them? Like, I don't know, but I still have a lot of my Sports Illustrated.
Office.
Yeah, maybe that's what I did. I was just ripping them straight from the dentist's office. Like, I don't know. I still have an entire bin full of Sports Illustrated covers. I have the cover with LeBron James on it when he was 16 years old, with Chosen One on it. But anyway, so media looked a lot different then. You kind of specialized in one thing, and that's what you did. Fast forward to, by the time I got to ESPN, the world was changing very rapidly. Newspapers were shrinking even more. A lot of papers were being eliminated, a lot of lost jobs. And I was fortunate enough to be with the biggest sports media empire in the country. And I did not go there to be a television person. I went there as a writer. You know, my first job at ESPN was being a general assignment sports columnist for ESPN.com. And I got that job because there was a guy named Skip Bayless who was a columnist for ESPN.com, and he was leaving his column to focus full-time on television, where they had developed a show called Cold Pizza, which eventually became First Take, and you know, you see where Skip is now on FS1. So being there at ESPN, where they have an arm in everything, allowed me to broaden my skills as a journalist. Because suddenly, and I think this is the age we're in now, there's a lot more required of young journalists than was required of me. So when many of you come up to me and ask me, how do I get to where you are? I'm be honest, I got no idea. I got nothing. I don't know how you do it, because the landscape does not look the same, right? So now there's so many younger journalists who are doing all of it. They're not only writing, they're also doing television, they're podcasting, they're doing radio. They're doing like 5 things at once. And that was not the world that I came up in. It was the world that I eventually adapted to. So by being at ESPN, just by virtue of just being in the building, eventually you're going to trip upon an opportunity to do an extension of what you already do. And by writing columns that I guess somebody thought was thoughtful and provocative, and I wasn't, and kind of fearless, they tend to stick people like that on television, which I didn't realize that. And so when my former manager who negotiated my contract, when he put in there that they had to guarantee me 20 TV appearances, I thought it was crazy. I was like, they're not gonna ever use me on TV for what? And they did. And within like 2 months, those 20 appearances, I'd blown through them all. And so I wasn't really thinking about television, even with that, until I remember this was the last week that Cold Pizza was in New York. And, I thought I was already winning, because they invite you to New York to be on the show that people see every morning on ESPN. And I have plenty of friends in New York. They're paying for the hotel, free meals. I'm like, this is gravy, right? Like, this is amazing. And I do TV for a week. We had just 3 segments a day. So maybe for the week, it's about, I don't know, total 45, 50 minutes of television for 1 week. That's pretty easy. And 3 weeks later, I get a check in the mail for $3,500. I didn't even know they paid. I was like, wait, they pay you to do this? Like, oh, now I see why everybody's doing television. And on top of what I was making as a ESPN.com columnist, it was like, that was a bonus. I was like, oh, sign me up. I'm like, okay. And then, I continued to do more TV at ESPN, and I'm doing Around the Horn and Sports Reporters and Jim Rome is Burning and Outside the Lines and all of these things. And at some point, Matt Lauer signed a new contract when he was on the Today Show, and they were paying him $23 million a year. And I was like, that's possible? I'm absolutely going to television. I didn't know if I would ever make $23 million, but if I made like $1 winning, right? If I didn't even make one, I could be way cheaper than that. I'm like, what? Yes.
Eat all of those words that you had said before about
They're not doing TV. And you know what else is that I thought about how so many, my journalism professors and even journalists I knew along the way, we don't do this for the money. Okay. I mean, we don't.
Maybe you don't.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, like, you can make financial decisions and still be about the nobility and the integrity of the profession. Because Lord knows, when I was in college and, striving to be a journalist, like, it was never with the expectation that I would either make money or have any kind of celebrity whatsoever. That's not what any of us got into it for. We literally got in it to tell stories, to hold institutions and, the powers that be accountable. Old journalism phrase, you afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. That's why we got in it, because the average salary for a journalist when I was in college was $19,000 a year. So my tuition was more than that per year, so I was hustling real backwards. And I still stayed in it. I was like, all right, I'm just gonna be broke, but I wanna write and I wanna do something that I love and that I'm proud of every day. So that was the part that mattered the most, hence why I tell young folks like yourself, if you love it, you will make money at it. But the difference is you have to love it when it doesn't give you all the glorious things that you think it will bring you. Like, I love this job just as much as I did when I was making $30 a story as a freelance writer. I love it the same. It's great that all this stuff has happened. It's really cool, some of the things I get to do and the people I get to meet and now the things I get to produce. But if I'm only in this for what it brings me and not in it because I actually have a passion and enjoy what I do, then when those big things don't happen, or if I don't wind up at ESPN, then that's not gonna sustain me. Like, you can't be in this you can have ESPN as a goal and that's fine, but ESPN is just a place. It's just a place. I mean, it's a great place, don't get me wrong, but it's just a place. So if you're in any profession and you're like, it's only gonna mean something if I wind up here, you may not be in it for the right reasons. Yeah, because there's a lot of other things that can happen along your journey that can be just as rewarding and fulfilling. It's about the twist and turns sometimes, not necessarily the straight and narrow path. But anyway, I say all that to say, very long-winded, rambling answer, the changes in journalism have been very stark. I mean, and even now, we're in the midst of another change that is, frankly, pretty heartbreaking for me, given how I was raised in this profession. We're in the period of intense misinformation. We have basically state-run propaganda being passed off as news. I don't need to tell you who I'm talking about. I think it's pretty obvious. And that's not to say that every network certainly has its deficiencies, but those deficiencies are becoming more and more acceptable and more mainstream as being a part of coverage. And it's pretty despicable to watch it happen. Like, the whole point of being a journalist is a phrase, again, that I heard in J school a lot, is like, we're supposed to be the watchdogs of society. We're supposed to be watching who's minding the store. That was the whole function of it. That's why democracy doesn't work unless you have a free press. And seeing just what the landscape has become is just really not good. And I fear that this is why our democracy feels like it's hanging on by the thinnest of threads, because the media has not done its job appropriately. So even though I've been through downsizing and the shrinking of the industry and other very financially doomed situations, this, in my career path, is the scariest, most frightening time in journalism I've ever experienced.
Wow. Explain that a little bit more, because that's...
Well, on top of the misinformation, we also are looking at a situation where most of the media is owned, media ownership is between 6 or 7 corporations.
Yeah, I tell that to my students.
That's not good.
Yeah.
Okay? Right. And so we were very much, when they say corporate media, you are going to be subjected to whatever is the interest of the corporation and not to the interest of the people who you're supposed to be serving. and not to the interest of the public good, which is what journalism is supposed to do. Like whenever there's a major leadership change at a media corporation, you can tell because the programming instantly changes. Most glaring example probably right now is CNN. And CNN underwent a massive merger with Warner Brothers Discovery, and you can tell because that lineup looks a lot different right now than it did before because they keep going through these same cycles of trying to appeal to a certain type of viewer only to wind up totally alienating and destroying their core audience because they're trying to court a viewer that only really wants to see extremism on television, and that's not what journalism can feed. Is like you have to be, you have to have a level of credibility. One of the, this lawsuit, if you haven't read it, this lawsuit that Dominion Voting Systems is bringing against Fox News is very eye-opening, and I've been reading a lot about it, and it's sort of unconscionable to me that you have a major news organization that willingly had hosts lying to the public on air about what was happening in the election because they were afraid to lose viewers. Now, anytime you are in a situation as a news journalist, media corporation, network, where you fear losing your audience because you can't lie to them, there is something fundamentally bad that has really happened. But the decision they made is the same decisions a lot of networks made in covering the last 2 presidential elections, is that things that we're supposed to check or call out or bring awareness to was totally, it subsided just for the sake of ratings. And so you had a lot of people looking the other way on things that like, wait, it's our job to talk about these things and to ask questions and discuss why is this happening. And you had multiple news networks who were ignoring these very obvious, dangerous things that were happening because the ratings were good. And that is bad for the public, very bad for the public. So now, with the viewers and consumers of all media, that has changed so significantly from when I was coming up in journalism, and that's not to say it was perfect then, but people now can, whatever is your mentality, your opinion, there are 20 publications that will only drive home that opinion. Not what the facts are, but they're only feeding that opinion that you have. And that has put journalism in a scary place. Because once we sort of strayed away from being able to dive deep into layered issues and to bring certain things to light and to, again, ask the right questions, present the right facts, present them as they are. Once we have given up on truth, that is really how democracies fall. So that's why I say this is the scariest time ever for journalism. I know you are thinking like, well, she seems fun. I promise you, but it's,
Students need to hear that.
It is the truth.
Certainly, and I would definitely encourage each of you to look into that Dominion voting situation. It is terrifying. We won't mention the network, but that's neither here nor there.
I will. But he can't.
So you talked about, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't somehow get into and delve into your book. But more specifically, the theme of this conference is standing in the gap. And so our choice of that theme was really to focus on our students and to encourage them to get involved and to get engaged, because at some point, we will no longer have the platforms that we do. So with that being said, when you think about your 16, 17-year-old self in Detroit, getting prepared to go away to college, at Michigan State, and you think about those individuals whose shoulders you had to stand on and those who you looked for guidance and sort of inspired you to guide you down the path that you took, who are some of those individuals?
Well, it all starts at home. That's number one. You know, my mother was extremely supportive of my journalism career. She may not have understood the nuances of it, and you know, it's a very non-traditional thing to share with, you know, your mother or your support system. Like, I want to be a sports writer. Like, what? Like, that doesn't even, you know, for a 16-year-old black girl from Detroit, that doesn't even make sense. But I read newspapers then every day because back then, y'all, you had to read the newspaper to follow your sports teams. And so I was a big sports fan growing up. I was a tomboy, loved playing sports, loved watching sports. So I had to follow newspapers. And so that's how I developed a love for writing and language and effective, you know, storytelling. Is like I had to read that. And I also was just generally a voracious reader, because the best journalists should be well read. And not just about sports, but about a lot of things, because you will be put in many situations where you have to put context to situations. So I know at the college level it's hard because you're doing a lot of reading. So thinking about doing reading on your own or some form of pleasure reading, you like, please, because I'm not a hypocrite. I took like a 4-year break from reading from things outside of what was assigned. Like, I didn't read anything that was not assigned, and I really regret that, because that would have been a great time to be reading other things, because, I don't know, I'm in the land of like thousands of books. Like, it would have been so simple to do this. You know, I'm sure you guys have a library on campus. I think you do. I saw it, right? Yeah, go read something for just enlightenment.
Say that.
Library on campus.
Yes, okay.
We do.
Yeah, have a library.
Say it louder for the people in the
Yes,
back.
you should use it for something besides the things you are assigned to read. And again, I know it's tough because you get a lot of reading as it is, but that's certainly one of my regrets that I had. I was like, I should have read even more in college, but I digress. So, you know, I think for me at that age, what was very key in my success is understanding what it took to do what I wanted to do. Roland Martin, who's a fantastic journalist who has his own media company, one of the few. It's one thing to be black media, but he is black-owned media, and that's very rare these days. But Roland said something to me about what he tells younger journalists who are interested in following his path. He said, "You want to do what I do, but do you want to do what I did?" And there's a very big difference with that. And so I was very lucky because I got exposed to the profession that I chose at my life's work early. So when I was in high school, I got accepted in this apprenticeship program at the Detroit Free Press, where they took 10 Detroit area high school students. You had to write an essay and apply to kind of get into this program, which I did. My journalism teacher in high school, she nagged me. This woman, she got on every nerve that I had. Like, but she, a lot of times the professors and instructors that are nagging you now, you will thank later. I promise you will. And even now, yeah, I know, right? And even now, when you think about maybe teachers you had in high school or middle school, the ones that nag you the most, they nag you because they care. And I know that seems really cliche to say, but it's true. So Mrs. Platt, that was her name, and I wrote about this in my memoirs. Like, she nagged me to apply for this program. I did. I got in, and it changed my life, because for 6 weeks I got to learn about journalism, about how to write a story, how to interview people. And the program was run by this woman named Dr. Louise Ritchie, who was a drill sergeant. She did not play. And because we would have to turn in, papers to her, like she'd tell us, all right, go interview this person in the newsroom about what they do. You got to write a story about it. And she put us on a deadline. Spell something wrong, see what happens. And this is before we didn't have spell check on the computer. Like, all right, it wasn't like that then. And let sentence structure be wrong. Especially if you misspell somebody's name, that was an automatic fail. You misspell somebody's name, which is why to this day, between that and my first front page story I ever had on one of my internships, I spelled somebody's name wrong and I wanted to melt into the ground because that was very embarrassing then. Now I see mistakes in stories, and I'm like, are these people not ashamed that they have done this? But because then, the internet wasn't where it is now. So like, if you misspell somebody's name in the newspaper, you had to write a correction that ran in the newspaper the next day. That correction went in your file, and if at some places, if you had a certain number of corrections, you were put on probation. So it was a way where you could lose your job if you spelled somebody's name wrong. And that's why if you tell me your name is Brad, I am asking you how to spell it. Because the name that I misspelled on that front page story was a very common name that had a different spelling. There's like 62 ways to spell Jasmine. So I don't care what they tell you. If you're a journalist, ask them how to spell their name. So at any rate, Dr. Louise Ritchie, who ran this program, was incredibly strict, but that's what we needed, and what coincided with that program that summer, it was a summer program. It was great. We got $10 an hour, which was fantastic when you're like 16 years old. The National Association of Black Journalists Convention was in Detroit the same summer, and she marched us all down to the convention, made us register as students. It was a nominal fee then. It's a little more expensive now. And she made us print out resumes, and we had to walk up to people we did not know, and you'd have to say, hi, my name is Jemele Hill. I'm a junior at Mumford High School, and I want to be a journalist. You had to keep doing that over and over. They have a huge job fair. She made us sit down and interview with people. The whole point is she wanted us to understand what it took and to get comfortable walking up to people, to have the confidence, to be able to say, hey, I want this. What do I need to do to get this? And it was very life-changing for me because not only did I become a member of NABJ, which I've been a member of since 1992, and being able to see journalists who look like you do the things you want to do is very affirming. But it also was a place that when I was in college, me and my friends, we would scrape together our pennies and go to the NABJ convention where we would pass out our resume and our clips and get internships. So whatever it is you want to do, you have to understand what that pathway to success looks like and be accountable for how you pursue that. You can, my former colleague at ESPN, Herm Edwards, always says, a goal without a plan is a wish. I think that's what he says. He used to say that all the time. And it's true. It's like whatever it is you want to do, the people whose career you want to emulate or have, find out exactly what they did. You may not follow the same thing, but if you have some idea, like, okay, I know that one day I want to write for major newspapers. Oh, I need multiple internships to do that. Okay, how can I get an internship? Okay, who do I need to network with? Who do I need to send my resume to? Who do I need to send thank you cards for after the interview? Still a lost art. Don't text people. Don't do that. I've had that. Like, you interview with somebody, do not text the person you interview with. Don't do that. Don't send an email. Actually write out. Go get you a thank you card and write in there, thank you for the interview. I promise you they will remember it. Emails get discarded and overlooked all the time. They will remember the person that sends them a thank you card. It's guaranteed. 1,000% success rate. You may not get the job, they're gonna remember you. All right? Just a little pro tip right there. But from the two mentors I got assigned in that program, who I'm still friends with to this day, to Dr. Ritchie, to my mom, to all the incredible journalists that I met while I was at the Free Press, who instilled a sense of belonging in me, which was very key because, don't know if you noticed, but sports is a very male-dominated industry. And it's not, most women are entering male-dominated industries usually to some degree. For the most part, most of the things you want to pursue, there might be more men. But sports is like a lot of men, okay? It's very, very, very male. And especially considering there wasn't a lot of black women who were in sports. Because I had those early mentors and people guiding me and planting seeds, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be there. I never had that feeling. I always had that feeling like, oh, I'm supposed to be here. And when I encountered those people who didn't think I should be there, it was too late. I was already armed with too much confidence. It was too late by then. I was like, oh, you should have got to me about 5 years ago. Maybe I might have believed you when you said I didn't belong here. But now, too late for that, buddy.
Imposter syndrome for you.
Oh, I have it all the time. You're like, what? But it's different, though. When I say imposter syndrome, it's like, I think, now you're going to put me on the couch. That was something I've struggled with more recently than I did at that point in my career. And I think that has everything to do with, and maybe this is the sort of downside, because I get asked all the time, like, do you feel like you've made it? I don't know what that feels like. I don't. And I think most people who really are ambitious, want to be successful, want to be great at what they do, in your mind, you think you know what success is, and then you get there and you're like, no, this isn't what I thought it would be. I think I want something more. It's always, the goalpost is always moving with me. And I'm trying to stop do that. I'm trying to stop myself from doing that, but sometimes it's hard because a lot of times, your problem isn't that you set your goals too high, it's that you set them too low. And when I first became a professional, my goal was to make $50,000 a year and write for Sports Illustrated. That was it. Wow. I set my goals way too low when I look at the things that I've been able to accomplish in my career. And so when those things came fast, I never wrote for Sports Illustrated. They did offer me a job, which is a story in itself, that I turned down. But when I started to achieve those things early, then it was like, oh no, what now? So for whatever your goal or dream is, I need you to blow that up 50 times bigger. And you might come close. So don't do what I did and set them way too low and then look up and just like, okay, what am I supposed to do now?
So you talked about belonging and representation, and unfortunately in the world of sports and many other professions, we're still celebrating firsts. The first woman, the first person of color, and so on and so forth. But I'd like to sort of transition the discussion to your thoughts about why we still have such a lack of minority representation in pro sports and even at the college level. Why is it that we're still looking for opportunities for individuals who have proven themselves? Eric Bieniemy, for example.
Yep.
Why is he not a head coach somewhere with the resume that he's put forth?
Let's see. I'm trying to think of the most Christian-like way I can say this at this point. But let's just look at the history of the NFL, all right? And among those firsts, as you mentioned, like, why are we still at a first? The NFL just 2 years ago got its first black team president in 100 seasons. Like, it's been 100+ seasons of the NFL. The first black team president just happened 2 years ago. And he's the team president of the Washington Commanders. And to understand a lot of what we see now, it also is a reflection very much of the history of this country. So Fritz Pollard was the first black quarterback in NFL history. The league was under a different name by then, but it eventually became the NFL. He won his rookie season, won the championship his rookie season. As a result, the NFL owners, led by, speaking of Washington Commanders, led by their owner, and those famous names and owners you hear in sports, the Maras went along with it, the Rooneys went along with it. They decided to ban black players for 12 years. A little part of the NFL history they don't really like to talk about. But yes, black players were banned from the NFL for 12 years. And when they decided to reintegrate, it was 1946, so that's a year before Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball, so you can understand the timeline. When they decided to reintegrate, they had a quota system in the NFL for, every team could only have a certain number of black players on their teams. There were certain positions we were not allowed to play, or there was just this understood agreement that these were leadership and thinking man's positions. So we can't have a black quarterback or a black middle linebacker. Those were the two positions that were off limits, because the middle linebacker is basically the quarterback of the field, giving the defensive calls, that kind of stuff. They would signal in to the middle linebackers. That's for a long time. You go in NFL history, notice all the middle linebackers are white. That is how that got that way. And eventually, the things started to change at the quarterback position, but it took a while. You had somebody like James Shaq Harris and Marlon Briscoe and all these different guys that played, and the conventional wisdom was that black men could not be leaders of men. That very mentality also extended itself to the actual leadership positions in the NFL. Now, eventually we just had 2 black quarterbacks that played in the Super Bowl, but it's still kind of crazy that it took to 2023 for that to happen, right? This past season, it's the highest number of black quarterbacks that have started for NFL teams on opening day. I believe it was 12 black quarterbacks that started on opening day of the NFL season. But that mentality that black men are not suited to be leaders is still very pervasive in the NFL. And so when you have owners who are like individual states, and Roger Goodell is not the boss of the NFL owners, he is the commissioner. He works for the owners, not the other way around. They will not break their comfort zone. And these are, a lot of the franchises are legacy owners who've been there for a long time. Think about how long Jerry Jones has owned the Cowboys. The Cowboys, I believe, are one of 7 NFL teams that has never had a black head coach. Jerry Jones is not going anywhere anytime soon, and let's say he does, his 2 children are executives in the organization. It's just going to go down for him, because that's how it happens. It's a reason the NFL has never had a majority black owner. So you see the history of institutional racism in the league. So these issues did not just show up. And so because of that, when it comes to general manager positions, team presidents, the leadership positions are the last frontier of which we're having a difficult time infiltrating. And the coaching fraternity in particular, it is not only a good old boy system, it's a good old boy system where everybody's related, right? So I think it was something like 68 of the assistant coaches in the NFL are they have either somebody they're related to or married into a family of somebody else that's in the NFL. Kyle Shanahan, who's his dad, Mike Shanahan. Okay, that's pervasive around the NFL. And of that family tree, it's very few black coaches that have that family tree that's already established in the NFL. So there are built-in processes that we are frozen out of. And those are going to be very difficult to overcome. So Eric Bieniemy, despite the fact he's won multiple championships with Kansas City, players love him, Patrick Mahomes love him. Patrick Mahomes is probably the quarterback of this generation. He took the Washington job because of the narrative that he isn't as involved in the offense as he should be as a coordinator. He took a job that was beneath him, to be honest, to prove to people that he does call plays, he does run the offense, and even though Andy Reid has said he calls plays, and let's just say that wasn't the case. 2 of Andy Reid's assistants on that same Kansas City staff both got head coaching jobs and never called plays. One of them is Doug Peterson, who won a Super Bowl. I forget who the other one was, but it was 2, right? So their play calling, every NFL coach does not play call. And some of them do not even have the resume to do that. The Giants, the coach they had before Brian Daboll called plays. But Joe Judge, I think that was his name, he was a special teams coach. He didn't call any plays, and he got to be head coach of the New York Giants. So the goalpost for black coaches is forever moving. They say, oh, you need to be a coordinator. They become a coordinator. Oh, no, you need to call the plays. It's like, what? Now is, oh, you need to have been a quarterback's coach. Prove you can run offense. So it's always moving because, frankly, the intentionality is not actually there. They're not really serious, and you could tell. So unfortunately, it's going to be in this position of a lot of stops and starts. And, Eric Bieniemy, what's happened to him is one of the most disgraceful things that I've seen as a sports writer, for a head coach to have that extensive of a resume, and has been on, I think, at last count, like 14 interviews, and has not gotten a head coaching job.
I think you were talking before about representation in terms of women in this very male-dominated industry. And I want you to finish your thought with that, because I don't know if, our students recognize just how rare of a person Jemele Hill is, doing what she does in the industry that she does it in. So I want you to talk a little bit more about that representation in terms of women, and then Black women.
It's hard to get a full grasp about where it is now. I definitely see, what I do like about this age in sports media is that there is more room and more positions where I see women, and especially women of color, who are driving shows with their opinions. And when I first got to ESPN in 2006, that was not really a thing. Of course, you've seen women who were anchors. I anchored for a while. You saw women who did sideline reporting. You saw women who were hosting shows, but often they were hosting shows with the role of teeing up other men for their opinions. And that started to change significantly when I was there, where you saw more women who were on Around the Horn, giving their opinion, using their expertise as analysts. And so I think that has been a great developing space. I think the digital space has also led to more opportunities for women as well. When you look at, Uninterrupted, which was started by LeBron James, and, they have a number of women there who are front-facing talent, and even, Bleacher Report and The Athletic, like so many different opportunities are being created. But that said, I do think it is about exposure, because I don't know if a lot of women see this as something that could be a really fulfilling career path, because it is tough. I mean, listen, I live in Los Angeles now. It's the sixth city I've lived in since I became a professional in this business. You go where the work is. If, women who desire to have families or, want to be married, that's not easy to do. A lot of travel. I mean, my travel schedule is pretty hectic now, but to be honest, it doesn't really compare to when I was a beat writer. When I was covering college football and college basketball, easily on the road 100 days a year. Easy. That's a lot to ask. Some people don't want to do that. You don't want your schedule to be that, that is the team schedule. So you covering, UT Martin basketball, like, coach's schedule is your schedule. When he says it's practice, I got to show up at practice and cover practice. When it's a game on the schedule, got to show up and cover the game. So you don't get much wiggle room, with your schedule, and that can be difficult. So it's not a job for everybody, and I think it could be especially tough on women. And then if you want to be in broadcasting, it can be especially tough on women because the scrutiny is different. And the scrutiny has definitely changed because of social media. That's something I didn't have to deal with for 70, 80% of my career. I didn't really have to deal with it until I got to ESPN, which I'm grateful for. So one thing you'll never discover about me is like tweets I had at 17, because Twitter didn't exist. All right, I never went through that that period. Like no old Facebooks. Facebook did not exist when I was in college. None of social media was not a thing. So I'm like, can't nobody go back. Like she said, what at 18? Y'all will never know. My stupidity was kept squarely in my own circle. And I say that, by the way, just as a side note, like especially if you're an athlete, but I'm gonna say this applies for everybody. As soon as you graduate, delete your Twitter. You're not famous. Delete it and start over. I'm just telling you because I promise you they're gonna find something.
Y'all
delete
need to
it.
Listen.
Delete your Twitter, whatever it is, just delete it. Just start fresh. okay? Because, you know, recruiters and supervisors and like the folks that you want to work for, they definitely comb through your social media. You know, when I was at ESPN, it was a host job that was open, and a young lady was a finalist, and they went through her Facebook page and they saw some photos of her. I swear she was on spring break, and they was wild, and she didn't get the job. And I was like, that's why I said, as soon as you graduate, first thing you do when you walk across the stage, go right to your phone to delete all of it. Okay. But the representation, you know, I think it's in a better place, but it's still a bad place. You know, when I was a columnist for the Orlando Sentinel, my first columnist job, I mean, I was the only black female sports columnist at a daily newspaper in North America. There's 405 newspapers. I was the only one. I mean, I know I'm good. I ain't that good. You know, I would be the only one. So, and that number hasn't gotten exponentially higher since then. So some of it is access, some of it is exposure, especially to, you know, college athletes, women, female college athletes. I think sports is, sometimes, especially as athletes, and I would say this to men too, but like I want to focus on women for the moment, is sometimes athletes get locked in their mind, you know, is, you know, sort of this is my sport and nothing else, and you don't think about the other ways you can stay connected to sports when your playing days are done, whenever that is. When you're a professional, when you're at college, high school, whatever, if you have a love of sports, there are so many different pursuits you can have, be it in marketing, media, all those kinds of things. So a lot of times as part of it is that they don't consider it as a viable, you know, career path. But I do think it's, you know, helpful when you see so many different women across ESPN, and like Mina Kimes is a friend of mine, and she's in a really unique space because typically most people who wind up in the booth, because Mina does games in the booth as well as being on NFL Live, they're former players. You know, as a woman, obviously, you're not gonna get that. You're not gonna get a chance to have that on your resume. And so for Mina to be considered one of the best NFL analysts and never played is really something. You know, I know to some sports fans, they're like, no, I want somebody who played the game. Listen, I'm not gonna say who it was, but I remember there was a very great NFL player that I had an opportunity to work with at ESPN, and he didn't know all the teams in his division. And I was like, you play? Like, I mean, I couldn't believe it, but it was true. I was like, what? I was shocked. He was like, you know, he's like, all I cared about was, you know, sort of my team and you know, the guy who was defending me on the field. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I mean, Shaq is my boy, but when he first started, it was rough at TNT. Rough. I was like, okay. I know, that's my homie. Like, I love Shaq, but them first couple years on Inside the NBA were not kind. They were asking him about players. I was like, does he? Okay. He does not know that they play. Because I think it's part of where that game that they play came from, who he played for. That's why, because those guys didn't know who they played for. And so, you know, I know, again, that people want their sports analysis sometimes to come from former athletes, and there's huge benefit in that, but they don't know everything either.
You kind of touched on cancel culture and being so available, and your breadth of knowledge and reach is so expansive. How does someone who has the platform you have, how do you navigate that cancel culture?
So, I'm going to give a slight pushback. I don't believe in cancel culture. Okay. I believe in accountability culture. That's a little different. Okay. And these days, when people get the slightest pushback to their opinion, they're like, oh, you're trying to cancel me. But like, ain't nobody trying to cancel you. I just don't agree with you. Like, that's different. Cancel culture, as we know, doesn't work for everybody. To me, you cancel when you cannot draw a check. If you can still draw a check, you ain't canceled. All right, like that's what cancel would be. That's what it means. So, I know this came up quite a bit with Dave Chappelle. I was like, he's selling out every show. What are y'all talking about? This man has not been canceled. Not even close, You got Netflix begging to write him another $50 million check. Like, that's not being canceled. If it is, please sign me up for that. I would take that any day. But I think the genesis of your question, if I'm understanding it right, is like navigating, this media landscape when it is true that certain things that you say can create a firestorm. I have been there many, many times. But there's a difference between saying things people disagree with, saying things that may get them to think or make them uncomfortable, versus saying things where you're punching down. It's the punching down part, I would worry about. Because even, you hear a lot of comedians talk about this, about like, comedy has changed so much, you can't say what you want to say. I'm like, what is it that you want to say that is so enlightening and so, so cutting through that you can't say now? Like, what is it? And typically what I found, usually the thing they want to say is something that denigrated somebody else that they were able to get away with 20 years ago. I mean, Eddie Murphy is probably one of the greatest comedians of all time, and even he said he wouldn't do Raw now. I mean, you go back and listen to Raw, it's like, oh, woo, it's what it says, right? But, and he's like, nah, and he's fine with that. Evolution and growth is part of the process. There are definitely things, if you are still intent on saying the same things you said at 17, you are not growing. There's nobody who wants to still say those things at all, because you haven't lived, your worldview is different. So I don't really worry about it, because there's nothing that there's no hot take I have that's so hot that I feel like, oh, if only I could say this, because I promise you, more often than not, the things that people really want to say that they're biting their tongue about is things they should not be saying. So I'm good. And, even, the things that I've, sort of gotten in trouble for over my tweets are not things I generally, it's only one thing I can think of I take back, but, that was, the language and how we describe people then was just different. And when it surfaced, when somebody tried to play the gotcha game with me, I retweeted what they said, because they had the original tweet in there, which was a tweet from 2009, by the way. As I said, people do still dig through there, and I thought I was pretty safe because I had a corporate job since the existence of social media, so I always had to watch it, to some degree. And so when that resurfaced, I just owned it. I was like, yeah, language has changed since then. And, I've become much more educated about this particular topic, and that was that. All you have to do is admit, like, oh, yeah, I did say that. It was wrong. And when you give people know where to go, it's when you fight. That's when, especially you fighting and you really don't have a leg to stand for. You just fighting the fight because you don't like people having the audacity, to say something or to hold you accountable. That's why I said I believe in accountability culture, not cancel culture, to hold you accountable about something that you said. So I don't really worry much about it. It's funny because some of the things that have created the sort of bigger black backlash than I would have anticipated that I've gotten in trouble for would not be, there's a couple things that obviously have been public, but there's some other things that I just never would have guessed I would have got in trouble for those. Like, I almost got suspended over something I said about Humira, the medicine. So here's another lesson I learned. Like, I didn't know this was a thing. If you work for a corporation, especially in media, be very careful about what you say about people who advertise with the company. So it could be, so we used to have this running joke at ESPN, don't say anything bad about Chipotle. That used to be the running joke. And the reason is because one of the ESPN personalities was upset about some Chipotle they got. And just, sometimes when you tweet or put something on social media, it's just slices of life. And they just put on there like, man, I can't believe this. And this Chipotle was terrible, blah, 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 going in. Chipotle, they advertised on ESPN. And they had to take the tweet down. And it became internally known as the Chipotle rule, right? It's like, don't say nothing bad about Chipotle. And no matter how sometimes frustrated I would get with certain airlines while traveling with ESPN, I did not rip the airline because I'm like, I don't know. But the one advertiser I didn't know was Humira. And the reason why I had tweeted, I was at home watching TV, and you know how these ads for medicines come on. And they'll be like, oh, you know, if you want help with this, this, and this, take this medicine. But then they list the side effects. And the side effects with Humira was so bad. It was like vomiting, your arm falling off, you can't feel your toes, your neck go a different direction. You're like, what? And so I just flippantly said on Twitter, I was like, listen, I'm sure Humira, helps a lot of people. But if you listen to these side effects, I would literally never take this medicine, right? That's what I said. I got a call maybe, I don't even think an hour went by, and they were like, you have to take that tweet down because Humira advertises on ESPN. I had never seen one Humira ad on one. That's why I thought they were safe. So I guess the Chipotle rule became the Humira rule. So I worry more about that. They don't worry about like some opinion I have. I was like, I just pray to God I don't say something wrong about an advertiser, that I use on a daily basis.
Can't upset the sponsors.
Yep.
Can't upset the sponsors.
No.
Okay. So we have a few minutes for Q&A. We should have Ms. Hannah Bilger. We'd like for you, if you do have a question, if you could stand and speak into the mic. And as we prepare for our first question, I want to do a little word association with you, Ms. Hill, if I may.
This seems like trouble, but go ahead.
Michael Jackson or Prince?
You said word association, so you tricked me off the start. Okay, so gotta answer this as a desert island question.
Okay.
So whenever I'm asking about an artist or rapper or whatever, entertainer, this one, I think about, okay, if I'm stranded on a desert island, what album am I taking with me? So to me, it comes down to, am I taking Purple Rain or am I taking Off the Wall? Because I'm, Off the Wall is Michael Jackson's greatest album. Don't at me. It is.
Okay.
I know y'all don't want to say Thriller. It's not Thriller. It's Off the Wall. But Thriller was great. But the answer is Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson.
Because I'm taking Off the Wall.
Okay, two more. Biggie or Tupac?
Biggie. That actually one was easier. And I love Pac. Don't get me wrong.
Biggie, thank you. Biggie fans in the house? Biggie fans in the house?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know
okay.
why? Because I'm taking Ready to Die on a desert island.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
why.
Okay, and the last one. And this is controversial. LeBron or Jordan?
Oh, I thought you were going to give me a hard question. It's Jordan. The answer is Jordan.
Jordan, raise your hand, Jordan.
The answer is Jordan.
LeBron? I'm LeBron, I'm sorry.
I realize this may be generational. Like, it's starting to get more generational, right? But I'm kind of ashamed of, because you lived through the Michael Jordan. Like, the young folks in here, I'm not ashamed, because I'm guessing you was born
It's for my
somewhere.
daughter. It's for my daughter.
Okay, in the 2000s, like, you missed, it was a time. We was really outside then, y'all missed it. So, you cannot tell me it's not about just the 6 rings, 2 3-peats, okay? It's not about that. But that's a part of it, and you're splitting hairs when you get in these conversations, for sure. LeBron is the player of this generation, maybe even the last 2 generations, considering he's played for 400 years, basically. But the thing about Michael Jordan is, like, nobody else could win. Nobody else could win. Great players don't have rings because of Michael Jordan. Barkley, he got it. He gravy trained it later. But it was Gary Payton at one point, right?
Karl Malone.
Thank God. All these great players could not get one. You knew what time it was if Mike got to the finals. You weren't getting the ring. You weren't.
And this is why she's the expert.
Yeah. LeBron, listen, great player. We splitting hairs again. I'm old enough to remember when they lost to Dallas. LeBron had 6 points in the finals. Has Michael Jordan ever had 6 points in an NBA Finals game? 6 points.
Okay, I quit.
Being guarded by
We
a
at the cookout.
500-year-old
I quit.
Jason Kidd. Come on, man.
I quit.
mean, it's not the same. It's not the same. He's going to finish as, obviously, he just got the, scored the most points in NBA history, despite not being really known as a scorer. You know what I'm saying? I put that in air quotes because he could always score. Transformational for sure. But Steph Curry got what, 3? Yeah. Kawhi got 2. Who has he stopped from getting a ring? Nobody that was in that upper echelon of players. D-Wade got 2. I mean, a whole bunch of cats got rings.
Y'all just let me drag me right now.
I'm
somebody
just
ask a question, please.
Started out so friendly and nice.
Yes.
Just ask a question.
And there is nothing that LeBron does that Michael Jordan didn't do. Hey, one of those 2 players won Defensive Player of the Year. One of them didn't. Michael Jordan won Defensive Player of the Year.
I think we have a question.
No, I'm kidding. I got more. It's Michael Jordan.
I don't mean to take you off the Jordan train.
No,
I got
please
respect
do.
for Jordan, but
I hate to lecture this man all night.
I got you. But I know in this industry you talk about connections and how important those connections are. How important are those connections truly, and how do you go about marketing yourself and really creating connections with people that could eventually elevate you?
Great question, and thanks for answering. I think you have to, as you make these connections, be very intentional about what you want from them, right? So to me, there's a difference between a mentor and a sponsor, right? A mentor is somebody that is your sounding board, that you're going through something you can kind of be a little vulnerable with and say, hey, I'm going through this right now. Can you help me out of this situation? What should I do? Strategizing with that kind of thing. A sponsor is somebody you want to put you on. So if that's what you want from that person, and I think most busy people will tell you this, you need to be upfront about that. They're like, hey, I saw you were in charge of this, internship program, or, you work at this firm, and, I don't know if you have some influence, but I really want to get there. Do you mind putting in a good word for me? I prefer you to do that as opposed to be like, oh yeah, can you mentor me? You don't really want me to mentor you. You just want to hook up, which is fine. But just be very clear about that. So I think that's a key part of it. I think also wherever you work, it's important that you develop relationships in the building. I know sometimes that we hear just do your work, go home. You can't do that. Because what you want to cultivate enough relationships in that workspace that when you're not in the room, they will talk about you favorably in the room. They will mention your name. They were like, hey, we're looking for somebody who'll do this assignment. You want somebody that'll bring your name up in the room. So when whatever job space you enter, you got to figure out who does what the players are, who has the influence where, and be constantly building political capital within the building. Because for every job, there is you being just good at the task, and there's also this other element where you have to be able to be good in spaces and build relationships with people. Now, if you're not in that workspace and you desire to get in there, I would say is if there are organizations attached to the thing that you want to do, become active in those organizations and network that way. Like I mentioned the National Association of Black Journalists. It's the largest minority journalism organization in the country. Great place to network, build relationships. There's so many other organizations devoted, even if you're in a fraternity, right? That's supposed to be one of the big benefits of being in a fraternity, is that often you have fraternity members that are that are supervisors, decision makers, can put in a word for you, and you have to be vocal about needing help. If you need something from somebody, don't be afraid to ask for it, because people respect that. They respect clear communication and transparency. So I think all those things will help you as you build, relationships, even athletic relationships. Like if you know of an alum, that's here that is in some position that you want to see if you can get an in at, reach out. Keep reaching out. Develop the relationship. Cultivate it. And one of the keys to cultivating those relationships is don't always reach out when you need something. That also goes a long way.
Hi. I don't want you to give away your documentary on Colin Kaepernick, but you were talking about Dave Chappelle not being cancel culture because he still gets a paycheck.
Yeah.
Colin Kaepernick was canceled.
You're right. That's
Because
actually
he-
canceling.
He lost his job, and no one would give him a job back. And is it that good old boys network you were talking? I mean, I could never figure that out. He's a good player. He took a knee, and really all the players, all the coaches, and all the owners are going to blackball him because he took a knee? Is that what it was?
Here's one of the most egregious things you can do by NFL standards. And this is, by NFL standards, I mean the owners, essentially, because that's who's running the NFL. It's a phrase that some of you may have heard, but some of you might not be familiar with. Can't mess with the church's money. Colin Kaepernick is not in the league because he messed with the church's money, right? And it's like when you have someone in his position, quarterbacks are considered to be the faces of the franchise, and someone in his position is trying to bring awareness to a very serious issue in America: police brutality, systemic oppression, racial injustice. The NFL can't have that. And so when they made the collective decision, and it was one of those things, and it's the reason why they settled in his collusion lawsuit, is that sometimes what's understood need not be said. And once he made that decision, which the other contributing factor is the former president used Colin Kaepernick as a political football, pun intended. And once he started using him at his rallies and continuing to drum up this animosity, and started to attack the NFL as a result, they could not have that. And so to them, the easier option was to just blackball him. And it's egregious for a lot of reasons, because it was a peaceful protest. It was, and people have to, this goes deeper, and some of this we'll get into in the documentary as well. NFL players until pretty recently were never on the field during the national anthem. And what happened is that it became, and by the way, it's not a rule that you have to be on the field, because that's the other thing, or not a rule that you have to stand for the national anthem. That's the other thing. In the procedure book for the NFL that the players get, the term they use is suggested that you stand. So it was not against any rules. The other part you have to realize is that when you see those flyovers and the presence of military at the NFL games, those are all paid sponsorships. So that relationship is a business relationship. It's not because the NFL is just so patriotic and they just want to, put on for America. They're getting paid to do that by the U.S. military. So when you add up all these different components, Colin presented a threat because, football is a sport of conformity. And, they believe, much like the military, one band, one sound. And so you cannot have people who disrupt the conformity. And I've said this a million times, this will be 1,000,001. If Colin Kaepernick had hit a woman, he would be in the league. He'd be in the league, because that's a corrective behavior. That's a behavior you could sell. Oh, he doesn't do that anymore. You cannot sell, oh, he didn't think police brutality is as bad as he once said. You can't really convince people of that. And they were also concerned about the impact he would have on other players in the locker room, because it wasn't just about, his protests. It's about the fact that, Colin the nature of his protest was going to create, either, as it did, other protests by other players. They would be looking to him as their leader, and maybe they start asking other questions. Why is the NFL, why is the healthcare situation like this? What's going on with head traumas? Start asking other questions, because those are justice issues as well. They don't want that. So their response was to get him out the league.
Maybe a couple more questions.
I know we had a chance to meet earlier, but first off, just thanks for taking the time to be here. I know your schedule's hectic. I got two comments real quick before I have a question. Number one, Quad plays football, and I coach basketball, but that young man's awesome. So if he's looking for some connections, that's the guy right there.
Right.
He's the best. Secondary, my wife loved your work on Below Deck, thought you were great in that.
You said your work. You mean me being drunk?
I called it your work.
That was just very artful the way you said that. Tell
Just,
your wife
for the
thank
people
you.
that hadn't seen it, you were talking about spades and liquor. I just, so. But the real question I have is, I'm fortunate. I'm a Division I head basketball coach, and I've been, I was able. Obviously, I was a head coach at Bethune-Cookman, and I've had the opportunity to hire 15 people, 11 of those being people of color. So the question is, how do we put people of color more? Like, I've done 11 out of 15. That's pretty
really good. That's
for,
really good.
for representation. But at
Yeah.
the end of the day, I'm very well aware. I've made my whole career on young black people. That's a fact. How do we get them at the seat at the table from where I'm at? You're in a significantly different ballpark than I am, but how is a small portion of leadership, how do we help develop and do that?
So you are a great example of what should happen. As a white coach in this industry, there's going to be a certain amount of benefit of the doubt that you're extended that maybe coaches of color are not extended, and you've leveraged your power to put them at the table. And that's really, I think, what real allyship looks like is, and in some ways, it's got to go beyond allyship. You got to be an accomplice. Like, not just the ally. Like, an ally supports you, like, hey, I got your back, all that. You gonna go help me bury the body? Figuratively, people, figuratively. Not literally. But you need people like that who are willing to put something at stake with you, right? And not just the support. So I think, especially when it comes to white folks who are in a power position, regardless of what level that you're at, if you are willing and see the problem and willing to intentionally seek out that representation, that goes a very long way. And not just one or two, like you said, 11 out of 15, like that's amazing, right? Because sometimes, white folks are in those positions and they might seek out one or two and be like, oh, I've done my job. No. Because if I go in any room now and I'm the only one in there, I don't consider that a seat at the table at all, because you know how much pressure that puts on me to be the voice and to represent a whole, a whole race of people, a race and a gender in my case. Like, no, I don't want that responsibility. And not only that, then I'm worried about how empowered am I to actually speak up on the things that I see wrong if I'm the only one in here. So it's not just about bringing one through the door, it's about bringing a whole bunch of us through the door so that it really can feel like an empowered collective space. So for any white folks in the room, if you can leverage that benefit of the doubt that you receive from jump to give opportunities to other, that's the mission right there. So thank you for taking on the mission. Because, as those coaches, as they grow and they go on to other places, that's something, I know you didn't get into it for that. You can be like, man, look what I helped do, And so that's great, because a lot of coaches, don't do that. Like, one of the reasons, other than being a great basketball coach, firmly in the conversation for maybe greatest NBA coach ever, what I love about Greg Popovich, it's the one I love about him, is, obviously, beyond what he's done on the court, he speaks up about the things that matter. And he knows, as a white coach in that position, that leadership position, it's going to hit people differently because he's saying it and he's investing in it. So those people that won't listen to me, because some people just look at me and they're like, I ain't listening to her, but they will listen to him. And, one of the things that I always find interesting is that even though issues of injustice and racial oppression impact all of us, not just the people of color, but all of us. It takes something from all of us. But when something happens, especially in the realm of sports, they go running up to LeBron James or running up to all the black athletes. I was like, why don't y'all, run up to Kevin Love, like ask him, you know what I'm saying? Like really, because, and I don't say that facetiously, because I think it's got to take that. It would have been great if somebody like Tom Brady would have used his platform to talk about, say, what happened to an Eric Bieniemy or just the lack of black coaches in leadership. That would be great. Because again, he played for a black coach, Byron Leftwich. It would have been real great if Tom Brady would have lent his voice to that. So I think that's like a really big area in which I think white people can be especially helpful. And I know there's sometimes some consternation, like, oh, should I speak out? What if I don't? Trust me, I was like, you just put in your voice and your name to it, and using your position to leverage us in will be a great way to be an accomplice and not just an ally. Yeah, I mean, like what Bruce Arians did in Tampa Bay was phenomenal. I mean, he had a black defensive coordinator, a black offensive coordinator. I mean, I think his whole coaching staff was basically black. And because he knew, as Bruce Arians, with his position in the game, he could do that, And so, and even the way that Andy Reid has been really outspoken about Eric Bieniemy, like I wish the results would have been different, but that's effective. That works, But yeah, you got to be willing to kind of put something on the line.
All right, so can I have all of the Civil Rights Conference Planning Committee, if any of you are present, if you would stand so we can acknowledge you and your greatness for helping us get Miss Jemele Hill here with us. And if we could give Miss Jemele Hill a very warm send-off. And on behalf of the University of Tennessee at Martin, we are so blessed to have had you. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to make this into a real barbecue. I got some books in the trunk of my car.
Not the trunk.
Yeah.